Hello everyone, it's me Ishmael, and today we're going to be going over how to calculate or solve IV drip rate problems in dosage calculation. So I'm just going to jump right into it. These problems are usually all set up the same way. They give you an order and the supply. So in this question here, they give us the order of 1,000 milliliters dextrose 5% in water, normal saline, to be run at 150 milliliters per hour. On supply, we have an IV bag of 1,000 milliliters dextrose 5% normal saline. So first thing is, look at your supplies. What do you have? They only give us the bag of fluids. We don't have an infusion pump. If it's not in the supplies, then that means we don't have an infusion pump. And if you don't have an infusion pump, then you gotta go and pull the appropriate size tubing and solve for the drip rate and set the tubing at the drip rate to fulfill that order at the correct rate. So, and there's two different types of tubing. I have them written out here. You have micro drip tubing, which delivers fluids at 60 drops or GTTs per milliliter, or you have macro drip tubing, which delivers 10 drops or 10 GTTs per milliliter. And the order is never gonna tell you which type of tubing to choose. It's up to you, the nurse, to choose the appropriate size tubing according to the rate or the amount of fluids that you're gonna be infusing. And I'll show you how to solve for that in just a second. So let's go ahead and start solving. Let's go ahead and start breaking this down. So we wanna know how many milliliters we're gonna give per minute. That's the first thing we wanna figure out, okay? So they've actually made it a little easier for us. They gave us the rate in milliliters per hour, okay? Let me switch markers here. "60 minutes in an hour." Okay, so that's 150 milliliters. We're gonna go ahead and do the butterfly method. So essentially what you're gonna wanna do is multiply 150 milliliters times 1 and divide that by 60. So multiply, pull out your calculator and multiply. 150 times 1 is 150 divided by 60. It's 2.5 milliliters per minute. Okay, now you want to translate that to drops per minute. Now looking at the amount of milliliters I'm infusing per minute, might make more sense to choose macro drip tubing. But I'm gonna solve for both, I'm gonna solve the drip rate using both micro drip and macro drip tubing, just so y'all can see what I mean. So first, let's go with macro drip tubing. Okay, so multiply 10 times 2.5 and divide the answer by 1. We we get 25 GTTs per minute with macro drip tubing. Now with micro drip tubing, multiply 60 times 2.5, divide the answer by 1. You get 150 drops per minute. Now, ask yourself, 150 drops per minute, that's kind of a lot. And when it comes to tubing like that, you know, the patient can move their arm and it can kind of mess things up. It's a little hard to calculate whether or not 150 drops is really gonna flow through that vein or drip into the chamber each second. So 25 is a reasonable amount of drops per minute. So it makes sense for us to go with the macro drip tubing. Now, if we were infusing less than 1 milliliter per minute, we'll probably want to go with the micro drip tubing. That's a good rule of thumb to use. If you're, in general, if you're infusing less than 1 milliliter per minute, just go with the micro drip tubing. Because think about it. Say you were infusing 0.5 milliliters per minute. With macro drip tubing, that will be 5 drops per minute. That's too few. That's too little drops per minute. In that case, you're gonna have blood flowing back up the tubing and you don't want that to happen. So if you're not infusing at least a milliliter, at least 1 milliliter per minute, you'll wanna go with 60, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna move on to another question. Sometimes you're gonna infuse medications. You might infuse like a antibiotic or a pain med or Tylenol in what's called an IV Piggyback. It's typically like 50 to 100 milliliters over 30 minutes or an hour. And we're gonna solve one of those questions here. Okay. This will just take me a second to write out. Okay. So with this situation here, we have an order to give aminophylline 250 milligrams in 250 milliliters of dextrose 5% in water. We have to run it at 50 milliliters per hour for 1 hour. On supply, we have, well, I didn't write it out, but we have the bag of fluids, 250 milliliters of dextrose 5% in water. And we have an ampule of aminophylline, 1 gram in 10 milliliters. So with this question, we have to figure out a few things. We have to figure out how much to pull from the ampule to add to the bag, and we have to figure out the drip rate because we don't have an infusion pump. So let's go ahead and start breaking this down. First, we want to figure out how much medication to pull from the ampule. How much do we need? We need 250 milligrams, right? So we need to figure out how many milliliters to pull from that ampule to get 250. So multiply 10 times 250 and divide the answer by 1,000. So we need to pull we need to pull 2.5 milliliters to get 250 milligrams. So you would break open the ampule and pull out with a syringe about 2.5 milliliters of the aminophylline and add that to the bag of 250 milliliters dextrose 5% in water. Okay, so now we have our bag of IV fluids or IV meds, and we're ready to administer that. We just need to figure out the drip rate now. So let's go ahead and solve for that. Okay, so we know we're just running 50 milliliters because we're running it for 1 hour. We're only giving 50 milliliters. So we want to figure out how many are we infusing per minute. Go ahead and solve. Multiply 50 times 1 and divide the answer by 60. Get about 0.83 milliliters per minute. Now, because it's less than 1 milliliter per minute, we're gonna go ahead and go with micro drip tubing and see what we get. Okay, so multiply 60 times 0.83 and divide the answer by 1. You get 49.8. Go ahead and round that up to 50 drops per minute. Boom. So we have our answers here. To fulfill this order, we're gonna take our ampule, we're gonna pull 2.5 milliliters from it and add it to our bag of fluids. And then we're gonna take some micro drip tubing, hook it up to the bag, and set up the drip rate to be 50 drops per milliliter. This is real simple stuff. You can get perfect with some practice questions. And I know there's different ways to solve this math, but this is just what works for me. Just remember, when you don't have an infusion pump, you want to find the GTTs per milliliter. In order to do that, just figure out how many milliliters are we infusing per minute, and then convert that to drops per minute. Real simple. Find the milliliters per minute here and convert that to drops per minute. Or if you have an infusion pump, it's much easier. All you got to do is figure out how many milliliters per hour. And here they actually gave it to us. So say with this question, we actually have a pump. We found a pump. Well, that just makes everything easier for us. With the pump, all you have to do is input the rate in milliliters per hour. That's 50 milliliters per hour. And the volume to be infused. So here we would just do 250 milliliters. And then we would time it to stop. We would go and stop it after 1 hour. And that's it. I hope this helps y'all to figure out this part of doses calculation, and wish you all a good night. Thank you.